there, welcome back and welcome to part 7 in this build log series of this 1 to 350 scale model of Mauretania. In today's episode I am going to be carrying on with my work on the hull and by the end of the episode, as you can see, I'm going to be in a place where the hull is glued together and I have finished all of the filling that needs to be done on the model. So by the end of this episode I want to be at a point where I'm ready to start cutting Mauretania's hawsepipe shapes into the bow, streamlining the stern to make it look more like Mauretania, less like Lusitania. So that's where we're going to be by the end of the video. Should be around 30 minutes today. So, without any further ado, let's crack on. Right, you get to a point with these things where it's very difficult to tell if they actually are smooth or not. You sort of sanded things down, but it's just difficult to know with the colour contrast and stuff if things actually are smooth. So what I am proposing to do now is I will glue these together, glue the holes together. I've just washed these in the shower to get rid of any dust and stuff. Glue these together and then I'll need to do the surgery to the back, to the stern, just to extend the length slightly. And then I propose to put a layer of primer on and that will make the hull a uniform colour, which will make it far easier to detect if things really are smooth or not. And we can progress from there. Right, the next step is to stick the hull together, and as you can see what I've done is I have applied masking tape at various points to pinch the seam together. And this results in a hull that is fairly well connected. It's not perfect, there will be a bit of filling that needs doing, but this is pretty good. So the next step is to actually glue this down. So what we're doing here is we are using some Tamiya extra thin modelling cement, and this is a purpose-built glue for plastic models. The way it works is it actually slightly dissolves the plastic, and then the two halves of the part sort of meld together and re-solidify, and you end up with a really fairly strong bond. So the process I'm going for here, as you can see, I've been fairly liberal with the amount of masking tape that I've used. I'm going over all of the seams fairly generously with this glue, and then I'm giving it a few minutes to dry. It doesn't take long at all to dry this stuff. It literally takes, I mean, it flashes off very rapidly. I'd have thought after a minute it's probably pretty much done its job, but I've sort of applied the glue, gone away, left it for 5 minutes, and then I've come back and I've done the internal seam as well. So I've glued it on the outside and I've glued it on the inside. Now that is probably overkill because this glue is exceptionally thin. So what that means is capillary action sucks it right into the heart of the joint. So I probably don't need to do both sides, but I'm a belt and braces kind of guy. So here we are on the inside, just doing this as well. And once I've done the inside and that's dried, what I've then done is I removed the masking tape from the outside, where necessary applied a bit more, but then I've gone over the areas that were covered by masking tape and I've applied glue in those areas as well, so that every single part of the hull has been glued. The final little thing I've done is I've applied one of the decking pieces above the hull, and what that's doing is it's just making sure that the hull is being glued with the very tops at an appropriate distance apart. Obviously it's plastic, so there's a bit of bend and give in there, but I'm using the decking just to make sure that as far as possible I have glued the hull in the correct way, so when it comes to adding the deck later we don't have any major gaps. Obviously the worst thing would be to have glued the hull pieces too close together so you can't fit the decks in, but equally it's not great to have the hull pieces too far apart so that there's massive gaps between the sides of the deck. So just by using that piece of decking and sort of masking taping it in place whilst the glue is flashing off, you just sort of give yourself a bit more confidence that you're gluing things in the right place. Once it's dry I will remove the deck. I'm not putting that in permanently yet, that's just it's a sort of gluing jig for the time being. Right, now the hull's all glued together now, and I've even done the bow and the stern. I did film this, but the film wasn't really worth showing because my hands were always in the way. So now I just want to have a look and see how it's stuck together. So how we've done, what, if any, filling is required. So the bow, pretty good actually. Very good, I'd say, actually. Solidly stuck. There's the bow. Pretty good. And then of course the seam all the way along, we'll sand that down in just a second. Going out to the stern where I clamped on and also had some tape. Now this bit was stubborn. It really didn't want to stay in one piece. But it does look like it has now actually bonded together. Still quite a bit of flashing there, so need to go quite heavily with a file to sort that out. And also one other thing I noticed is right at the very stern, difficult to get the angle, but you can see this side, there's actually a sort of section missing. So I'll need to fill that to bring the port side up level with the starboard side. But all in all, pretty good really. So on the inside, what I did basically is I glued it together, let it dry, and then I quite heavily went over the inside and added quite a significant quantity more glue just to really bond everything together nice and snugly. So I'm now going to go over with my trusty microfile, needle file, whatever you want to call it, and trim off this centre line so we've got a nice flat bottom, and then we'll carry on. So I thought I'd just show you where we're up to. As you can see, we're all glued together now, and I have sanded this seam so the actual bottom of the hull is nice and smooth. You'll notice that this section here hasn't been sanded at all, and that is because that's where my lights are going to go. So for those of you who maybe don't remember, the plan for this model is to cut out a section of the under of the hull here and to put my light box, embed it into the hull so that I can always access these LEDs, so that I can always get access to them to replace them at a later date if they fail, or probably more accurately, when they fail. Although it's not always achievable, it's always a good thing to build something with maintenance in mind, even though, as I say, it's not always achievable, particularly on models. So I haven't bothered to sand this section because it's going to get cut out anyway. But the rest of it is all sanded, and we go back down to the stern section, and all nice and sanded there too. And finishing up at the back, you can see that we are missing a little piece here, and that isn't me being a tit and cutting something off. That was missing to begin with. So a little bit curious. Don't really know why that was missing, but we'll have to sort that out. I need to redress this rear section, stern section anyway, so that's not too much of a problem. But you can see that the rest of it, we've lost a little bit of detail here where I had to sand to get the two parts to sort of marry up, but again, not a huge problem. We can repair those lines with the same method I used on the rest of the hull. And I'll take you to the bow. As you can see, the bow all nicely done too. What a lovely shape, lovely curvature. So that's us all done here. The next step is just to make sure I haven't been an idiot and I haven't missed a few portholes. Now the reality is, in fact, that I have. There's a couple there, there's a few others here and there. So just check that I haven't missed loads of stuff. There's a few bits of polyfilling that I'm going to fill before I go any further, just because I can see that they're not perfect. This area here, for example, has been sanded, but I can see that there's a darker red patch which shows that the file hasn't reached that point, even though that is the flat section, and actually if I rub my finger on it I can feel that's not flat. So I may as well address these points when I see them, even if it is before I get on to actually priming the hull. So we'll get on with that. So I'm going to fill up these holes first, and then we'll look at the stern and redressing that to make it more Mauretania shaped, less Lusitania shaped. Right, just doing some calculations for the reprofiling of the stern, just to work out how much additional length I need to add on. Mauretania was slightly longer than Lusitania. She was 790 feet rather than 787 feet, which approximates in scale terms to a difference of about 2.6 millimetres. Now, that is not a considerable amount, but it is sufficient to allow me to sort of tweak the stern shaping of Mauretania to give her more sort of characteristic rounded shape. So what I'm going to aim to do is to remove a very small section of the stern part of the model and just add an additional 2.6 millimetres in achieving Mauretania's stern shaping. So that's the plan. So we'll crack on with that now. Right, so to get an accurate shape for the stern of Mauretania, I'm using this deck plan for C deck, or the shelter deck, which is the deck that actually had the uncovered poop deck of Mauretania. And what I've done is, it's crude, I admit, but on my monitor I have scaled the image such that the extreme beam of the ship is 74 mil. And if I measure on my model, the beam of the model is 74 mil. So that means that this plan is scaled on the screen the same as my model itself. So in a lovely ideal world, that means that the outline I can just see shining through this card should, by and large, match the model I have up to about here, at which point I will need to recreate Mauretania's stern shaping rather than Lusitania's stern shaping. So this is a bit of an experiment, and if my model is wildly off what this shows, we might have to reevaluate slightly. Challenges of drawing on a computer screen are also somewhat interesting. So let's just have a see at how that works. Right, the first time worked, I just didn't do it particularly neatly. Second time, I will try to do it slightly more accurately. And I'm also going to mark the centre line. Okay. Right, here is the finished piece, and I'll just stick it down onto the table so it doesn't move. And here is our model. So there we go. So as you can see, maybe you can't, I'll try to reposition the camera so that you can. Try to get it right over the top. This is the model now, directly over the top of that template. And as you can see, we have the slightly more curved stern section of Mauretania, standing slightly further back than the stern section of Lusitania. So if I measure this now, $2.5 mil, which is pretty much bang on what we wanted. We wanted 2.6, this is 2.5. So that hopefully does rather illustrate the fact that although Mauretania was slightly larger than Lusitania, the difference was pretty minimal. But nonetheless, it's a significant difference, and perhaps I think on this model, really the significance of the difference is more in the shaping of the stern rather than the length, because I think, I don't know about you folks, but I certainly wouldn't miss 2.5 mil over a model this size. I probably would notice the difference in the stern section. So this is what we need to do to redress it. We just need to reshape the stern. And what I'm going to start off by doing is by gluing a piece of plastic around the outside that follows the shape of this stern. And then I can start to actually sort of sand down and fill areas and all this sort of stuff. But baby steps. I need to build this up slowly. Right, I've decided against chopping the aft section off the model entirely, and instead what I've done is I've glued this piece of plastic onto one side, and now what I'm going to do is, using this marker, which is where I need to butt the stern up against, that's 2.5 mil from the actual stern that I've drawn, you see, I'm going to attach this piece of plastic in such a way that it maps out the stern shape that we want. And happily, it follows that bend really quite nicely. So that makes things fairly straightforward. So first things first, I am going to get the right length and then make a cut on the plastic at the appropriate juncture. Which is there. then this needs to get glued in place. And that will give us the extended length for the hull. So, the way this works is on the other side, I have glued up to this hull plate marking here. So it's going to replicate that on to the side. And we're going to glue up to there. And that gives us the extended hull that we need. Come on, glue. So there you go, there is our extended length. I'll put my hand underneath it, it's a bit more obvious. There we go. And if we measure it from the aft of the stern, bang on 2.1 millimeters. So, lovely. So the plan now is to fill this and then start sanding and also filling underneath to bring the stern level with this section. So a little bit more work to go. What I've done is I've waxed this paper underneath the stern. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that void with some polyfiller. Now then, we'll almost certainly have to come back at some point to sort of add a little more, but this is just a starter for 10 to get the rough shape. So there we go, let that dry. Just getting ready to do a coat of paint. This won't be the final coat of paint by any means, of course, but it's really a coat of paint to see how I'm doing with regards to filling these holes. Before I do that though, we're going to give the whole model a nice degreasing with some alcohol, just to get rid of any oil and stuff that my fingers will undoubtedly have left behind on the hull. It's important that you do this because it can really affect how well the paint sticks to the model. It also is quite good at getting rid of unwanted blemishes and things, old paint, pen marks and that sort of thing. So it's, you know, a sensible thing to do. Right, as you can see, I've painted the hull, done another layer of body filler, and I've sanded it again, and I'm pretty sure this is the finished article because rubbing my finger over the top, your fingertips are extremely sensitive, so I can detect hull plating very, very easily. And I'm really not feeling any difference at all, maybe just a shade of difference in the texture. So I'm fairly confident when I paint this black again, we'll have a nice flat piece of hull there. So what I'm doing, while I still have these sort of slightly washed out lines, I'm just going over and doing my old sort of scoring technique to re-establish some of these hull lines. Basically what's happened is, as I've sanded this down, I've obliterated quite a lot of the hull markings in this area, and the same is duplicated on the other side, although perhaps to a slightly lesser extent. So I'm just going over, whilst it's really easy at the moment to line up the ruler because you've got these sort of white lines, I'm just going over and doing the obvious ones. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the hull again, and once it's all a sort of uniform colour, it'll be very obvious if any additional hull lines are missing, at which point I'll cut those in. And then we will cut out the hawse pipes to the right sort of shape. So that's the plan. Crack on. However, 33 minutes seems like an appropriate point to stop for the day, so I will leave the video there. If you have any questions or comments on the model, do please let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. If you've enjoyed this, do please like and or subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Hopefully a bit sooner than this one came out. Bye for now.